Mercedes did not create AMG in a marketing department. It did not come from a branding exercise, a trim package, or a meeting where executives decided the three letters would look good on a grill. AMG began because two Mercedes engineers wanted something the company itself was not interested in building: faster engines, harder-edged cars, machines that sacrificed some of Mercedes-Benz refinement in exchange for aggression, noise, and speed. Hans Werner Aufrecht and Erhard Melcher were engine engineers inside Mercedes-Benz during the 1960s, and while the company focused on luxury, reliability, and comfort, these two became obsessed with extracting performance from engines that were never supposed to become racing weapons. They developed a competition version of the Mercedes 300 SE engine, and when that work started producing results, including 10 race victories in a single season with privateer competition, the message seemed obvious. There was serious performance hiding inside these Mercedes engines. The problem was that Mercedes itself was not particularly interested in chasing it. So Aufrecht did something that would eventually create one of the most valuable performance badges in the world. He left. Melcher followed. In 1967, working from a rented former mill outside Stuttgart, they created AMG. The letters came from Aufrecht, Melcher, and Gross Aspach, Aufrecht's hometown. The philosophy behind those letters was even simpler. Take a Mercedes and make it perform at a level the factory never imagined. And that history is exactly why what happened to AMG decades later is so fascinating, because Mercedes eventually went from resisting this philosophy to buying it, to building its entire performance identity around it, and then finally discovering that the letters themselves were valuable enough to sell even when much of the engineering that made them famous was missing. That is the contradiction at the center of modern AMG. The badge became so powerful that Mercedes no longer needed every car wearing some version of it to deliver the experience that created the reputation in the first place. And if you want to understand how those three letters became diluted, you first have to understand just how much they once meant. In AMG's early years, there was no enormous factory network, no global advertising campaign, and certainly no endless catalog of AMG-themed appearance packages. There was a small group of engineers modifying Mercedes engines for customers and private racing teams who wanted something Stuttgart would not sell them. Then came the moment that transformed AMG from an obscure specialist into a performance name people could not ignore. In 1971, AMG entered the 24 Hours of Spa with a Mercedes 300 SEL. On paper, this was almost the wrong car for the job. It was enormous, luxurious, and heavy, a four-door sedan designed more naturally for carrying executives than attacking an endurance circuit. AMG took that basic machine, enlarged its V8 to 6.8 liters, covered the body in bright red paint, and sent it racing against lighter cars that looked far more appropriate for the track. The nickname came almost immediately, the Red Pig. It sounded like an insult because, visually, the thing looked absurd. A giant sedan, surrounded by purpose-built competition machinery, should have been a novelty. Instead, it became the car nobody could stop talking about. Driven by Hans Heyer and Clemens Schickentanz, the roughly 4,000-pound Mercedes finished second overall and first in its class. The joke had just beaten much of the field. That result mattered because it captured AMG's identity in one image. This was not subtle badge engineering. Nobody was pretending the 300 SEL was a race car because it had aggressive bumpers and larger wheels. AMG had actually transformed it. The car looked inappropriate until it started moving, and then the engineering justified everything. It was ridiculous, excessive, technically obsessive, and unquestionably real. That race gave AMG credibility, but the way AMG built engines gave the company something even more valuable: mythology. The famous principle became one man, one engine. Instead of moving each performance engine through a conventional production line where different workers completed different stages, AMG engines were assembled from beginning to end by an individual technician. The builder became responsible for the complete unit, and the finished engine carried a plaque bearing that technician's name. In the early days, this was partly a consequence of AMG being a small operation, but as the company expanded, the idea evolved into something much bigger. It became a symbol of craftsmanship. You could open the hood of the right AMG, look at the engine, and see the name of the human being who assembled it. That tiny plaque carried enormous psychological weight because it told you this engine was not merely another Mercedes power plant with a software tune. Somebody had built it as an AMG engine. Stronger internal components, different turbocharging strategies, dedicated cooling, aggressive calibration, specialized transmissions, brakes designed for repeated high-speed punishment, suspension geometry tuned around performance, steering programmed to react differently, and software written to make the entire car feel more immediate. The point was never simply that an AMG had more horsepower. Plenty of cars have horsepower. AMG was selling transformation. A regular Mercedes was designed to isolate you from vibration, noise, harshness, and effort. A real AMG deliberately allowed some of those sensations back into the experience because emotion was part of the product. You felt the drivetrain. You heard the exhaust. The steering became heavier. The suspension reminded you that the road underneath the tires actually existed. Comfort was still there because these were Mercedes products, but comfort was no longer the only objective. That difference became so desirable that Mercedes eventually decided it was better to work with AMG than compete with its own customers, sending cars away for modification. During the early 1990s, the relationship became official with the C36 AMG, one of the first factory-supported Mercedes-AMG collaborations sold directly through Mercedes dealerships. That changed everything. Until then, AMG's mystique partly came from operating outside the establishment. Now the establishment wanted in. Customers no longer had to buy a Mercedes and then send it somewhere else for the transformation. Mercedes could sell the transformation itself. Daimler Chrysler acquired a controlling interest in AMG in 1999, and by 2005, Mercedes had taken complete ownership. Normally, this is the moment enthusiasts become nervous. Giant corporation buys rebellious specialist, accountants arrive, product becomes safer, identity disappears. But for a while, AMG appeared to achieve the opposite. Mercedes money gave the division resources it could never have possessed as an independent tuner. AMG could develop more than engines. It could influence entire vehicles and eventually create machines such as the SLS AMG and AMG GT that were not simply ordinary Mercedes models with additional power. AMG had gone from modifying Mercedes products to becoming the performance soul inside Mercedes itself. And that success created the temptation that eventually changed the meaning of the badge. Because once customers began associating AMG with racing heritage, hand-built engines, huge brakes, explosive acceleration, dramatic sound, and exclusivity, Mercedes possessed something tremendously valuable. Not just engineering, brand equity. Put AMG on the right car, and customers understood the message instantly. Faster, meaner, more desirable, more expensive. So the commercial question almost asked itself, why limit that badge to the relatively small number of customers willing to buy the full performance machine when millions of ordinary Mercedes customers might happily pay extra to own a piece of the image? That is where the story stops being about building AMGs and starts becoming about selling AMG. Mercedes introduced AMG line packages across ordinary models, and this distinction is where many casual buyers get confused. An AMG line Mercedes can look dramatically more aggressive than the standard version. Different bumpers, larger wheels, sportier interior details, AMG branded trim, maybe a firmer suspension setup depending on the model and market. Park one beside the basic Mercedes and the AMG line car clearly communicates performance. But underneath, it may remain fundamentally the same ordinary Mercedes powertrain. No hand-built engine, no radically transformed drivetrain, no comprehensive AMG engineering program turning the car into something mechanically different. The visual language of AMG has been separated from the engineering philosophy of AMG, and Mercedes can now sell the first part without paying the full cost of delivering the second. From a business perspective, it is brilliant. From the perspective of what AMG originally represented, it is where dilution begins. Think about the contrast. Aufrecht and Melcher left Mercedes because the company would not pursue the level of performance they wanted. They risked their careers, rented a mill, tuned engines, went racing, and built credibility by making cars faster in ways customers could actually feel. Decades later, the company that once resisted that obsession could charge customers for AMG styling on cars whose fundamental mechanical character remained much closer to a normal Mercedes. The letters themselves had become profitable. That does not make AMG line a bad product. Plenty of buyers want the look without the fuel bills, insurance costs, aggressive ride, expensive brakes, or maintenance of a full performance model. For those customers, an AMG line package may make perfect sense. The issue is identity. When the same three letters appear on floor mats, steering wheels, body kits, wheels, dealership advertisements, and increasingly broad ranges of vehicles, the visual distinction between an actual AMG performance car and an AMG-themed Mercedes becomes less obvious. The customer sees AMG everywhere. Exclusivity works in the opposite direction. The more widely you distribute a symbol, the more money it can generate in the short term, but the less rare that symbol feels. And rarity was once part of the entire appeal. There was a time when seeing AMG on the back of a Mercedes implied something significant had happened underneath the skin. You expected a serious engine, meaningful chassis work, upgraded cooling, stronger brakes, and engineering designed around performance rather than appearance. Today you have to know exactly what version you are looking at. That is a very different relationship between badge and machine. And even within genuine AMG products, the definition has expanded. Models wearing numbers such as 43, 53, and 63 can occupy very different levels of performance and use very different engineering philosophies, yet all live under the same AMG umbrella. That broader strategy gives Mercedes a performance ladder. A customer who cannot justify the most extreme model can still enter the AMG world lower down, and somebody shopping a normal Mercedes can buy AMG line styling lower still. Financially, this makes enormous sense. AMG stops being one product category and becomes an entire monetization system. The company can sell the image at one price, stronger performance at another, and the full flagship experience above that. But enthusiasts notice the trade-off immediately because the distance between the cheapest AMG-branded Mercedes and the most serious AMG machine has become enormous. And nothing shows that better than the engine, because for decades, the engine was where AMG's personality lived. The classic formula was unapologetic: large displacement, strong torque, a soundtrack that announced the car before you saw it. Modern AMG V8s became more sophisticated, moving to turbocharging and using layouts such as the Hot V design, where the turbochargers sit inside the V between the cylinder banks. That arrangement shortens the exhaust path to the turbos, helping response while packaging huge performance into a relatively compact space. Then AMG tuned everything around that hardware: throttle calibration, shift strategy, traction control, exhaust valves, launch behavior, drive modes. Even sound became an engineering discipline. An AMG V8 did not simply produce noise because combustion happened to be loud. Engineers shaped the experience, adjusting exhaust systems, ignition strategies, and software to create the low-frequency rumble at idle, the bark under load, and the crackles during aggressive deceleration. Purists might argue over how much electronic enhancement belongs in a performance car, especially as interior speakers increasingly reinforce certain frequencies, but the larger point remains. AMG understood that speed alone was not enough. The theater mattered. That is why the badge dilution debate becomes even more intense as AMG moves into smaller engines, hybrids, and eventually full electrification. Technology can replace performance numbers surprisingly easily. Electric assistance can produce instant torque. Hybrid systems can fill gaps in the power band. Electrically assisted turbocharging can reduce lag. A four-cylinder hybrid can generate output that once required a huge V8. On a stopwatch, the new car may be brutally effective. It can launch harder, respond faster, use less fuel, and satisfy regulations the old engines simply could not meet. But performance figures were never the only reason people romanticized AMG. Nobody tells the story of the red pig because it represented efficient transportation. Nobody opens the hood of a hand-built V8 to admire the spreadsheet. The emotional appeal came from excess, a huge engine where a smaller one would have worked, a luxury sedan behaving like something it had no business becoming. Mechanical drama, sound, heat, vibration, personality. That presents Mercedes with a problem bigger than horsepower. If the company continues expanding AMG branding while simultaneously moving the mechanical experience further away from the ingredients that created AMG mythology, eventually the letters risk describing a marketing category more than a specific philosophy. And that is where the title of this story becomes uncomfortable. Mercedes did not dilute AMG because the original formula stopped working. It diluted AMG because the original formula worked so incredibly well that everybody wanted a piece of it. AMG accumulated decades of credibility, and credibility is expensive to create but remarkably easy to monetize once you own it. Put those letters on more products, and each one gains some reflected desirability from the cars that built the legend. An AMG line crossover can borrow a little visual aggression from the same three letters associated with spa, hand-built engines, and outrageous V8 sedans. A smaller AMG model can borrow status from the flagship 63. Merchandise can borrow identity from the cars. The entire Mercedes range benefits from proximity to AMG, and every additional customer who pays for that proximity turns heritage into revenue. Again, this is not unusual in the automotive industry. Performance brands routinely become styling packages because styling packages are extraordinarily profitable. Exterior trim is cheaper to engineer than a bespoke drivetrain. Larger wheels are cheaper than developing a hand-built engine. A steering wheel and body kit can change how a customer feels about a car without requiring the manufacturer to create an entirely different machine underneath. The customer gets the image, the manufacturer gets margin, and almost everybody leaves happy. Almost. Because enthusiasts measure these things differently. They remember that AMG became famous precisely because it was not cosmetic. The red pig looked ridiculous until its performance proved the point. One man, one engine mattered because a person had physically built the heart of the car. The giant brakes mattered because the car could reach speeds that demanded them. The suspension mattered because the engine made enough performance to require a chassis capable of controlling it. Everything had a reason. When AMG becomes a visual theme applied before those engineering changes happen, cause and effect reverse. Instead of aggressive styling communicating what the hardware can do, aggressive styling becomes the product itself. And once that happens, people naturally start asking what the badge actually guarantees anymore. This does not mean real AMG engineering has disappeared. Far from it. Mercedes-AMG still develops extremely serious performance cars, sophisticated drivetrains, dedicated chassis systems, and machines with capabilities the founders could never have imagined in 1967. The AMG GT exists because Mercedes eventually gave this once tiny operation the resources to engineer complete performance cars. Modern traction systems can distribute torque with astonishing precision. Adaptive suspension can transform a car from comfortable road machine to tightly controlled track weapon at the press of a button. Hybrid systems can deliver staggering acceleration. Electric performance platforms may ultimately become faster than every combustion AMG that came before them. The technology is not necessarily getting worse. In many measurable ways it is becoming extraordinary. The risk is that the brand becomes harder to define emotionally. If AMG once meant a Mercedes fundamentally transformed by obsessive performance engineering, what does AMG mean when the same identity is stretched across appearance packages, entry performance models, four-cylinder hybrids, V8 flagships, dedicated sports cars, and eventually electric vehicles with simulated shifts and digitally generated sound? Maybe the answer is that AMG has simply evolved. Maybe insisting that every legitimate AMG needs a giant hand-built combustion engine is nostalgia disguised as purity. After all, Aufrecht and Melcher were engineers. Their obsession was performance, not preserving one specific technology forever. If electric motors, hybrid systems, and advanced software create faster and more capable machines, you could argue that pursuing those technologies is perfectly consistent with the original rebellious spirit. But there is another side to that argument. AMG was never respected merely because its cars were fast. It was respected because the speed came with character. Plenty of machines can generate impressive numbers. AMG created experiences people remembered. The sound approaching from down the road, the vibration at idle, the way a huge sedan seemed to shrink around the driver when the throttle opened, the absurdity of using more engine than anyone reasonably needed, the knowledge that somewhere in a Falterbach one technician had assembled that engine and signed it. Those details turned specifications into identity. Remove enough of them, spread the name across enough ordinary products, and Mercedes eventually faces the same problem every luxury brand faces when it discovers how profitable its logo has become. How much can you sell the symbol before the symbol stops meaning what made people want it? That question becomes especially important in the electric era because electric performance is becoming easier to democratize. Instant torque is no longer exotic. Enormous acceleration is no longer exclusive to specialist performance divisions. A silent electric sedan can produce straight-line speed that would have seemed supercar level not long ago. So AMG's future cannot simply be more horsepower. If every electric vehicle becomes fast, AMG has to make speed feel distinctive again. Simulated gear changes, generated soundscapes, aggressive torque calibration, specialized chassis tuning, advanced cooling, track-focused software, and performance-specific platforms are all attempts to answer that problem. Some enthusiasts will embrace it, others will call it artificial. Either way, the challenge exposes the deeper truth behind everything AMG has become. The badge survives only if the experience underneath it continues earning the reputation printed on top of it. That is why this story matters beyond whether someone prefers a V8, a hybrid, or an electric motor. AMG began as an act of engineering rebellion. Two men inside Mercedes believed the cars could be more exciting than the company wanted them to be, so they left and proved it themselves. They did not have global dealerships. They had a rented mill. They did not have a century of brand equity. They had engines, racing, and results. Then a gigantic red luxury sedan went to Spa and embarrassed cars that looked far more serious. Customers noticed. Mercedes noticed. Eventually, Mercedes partnered with AMG, bought AMG, funded AMG, and made AMG central to its own performance identity. That is an extraordinary transformation, but success changed the economics. Once AMG became desirable enough, Mercedes no longer had to sell only the engineering. It could sell access to the image. The letters migrated from rare machines to broader model ranges, from mechanical transformation to visual packages, from a specialist identity to a marketing language understood by almost every Mercedes customer. And that may be the ultimate irony. AMG spent decades proving that three letters could stand for something far more meaningful than a badge. Mercedes then discovered exactly how much money could be made by turning those three letters back into a badge. The full-fat cars still exist. The engineering talent is still there. The performance can be astonishing. But now, when you see AMG written across a Mercedes, you have to look closer. What engine is underneath it? What drivetrain does it use? Was the chassis genuinely transformed? Is there a technician's plaque under the hood? Or are you looking at styling designed to borrow the feeling created by somebody else's engineering? That distinction would have sounded ridiculous in the days of the Red Pig, because back then AMG did not need to tell you a car was serious. It went racing and proved it. Maybe that is the standard the brand ultimately has to return to, regardless of what powers the cars next. Not bigger badges, not more aggressive bumpers, not a wider catalog of AMG-themed products. Something you can feel from the driver's seat that could not have come from an ordinary Mercedes. Because the original AMG promise was never really V8s, exhaust noise, or even one man, one engine. It was transformation. Take something refined and make it wild. Take something comfortable and make it exciting. Take a Mercedes and uncover a personality the factory never knew it had. If Mercedes can preserve that idea through hybrids and electric cars, AMG can survive almost any technological change. But if those three letters become primarily a profitable decoration, then the company risks spending the very heritage that makes them valuable. So the next time an AMG passes you, do not just look at the badge. Ask what the badge is actually buying. Is it the descendant of two engineers, a rented mill, a hand-built engine, and a 4,000-pound red sedan attacking Spa? Or is it simply the most successful piece of performance marketing Mercedes ever inherited? That answer will decide whether AMG's next chapter is an evolution of the legend or the moment the legend finally became just another trim level.